Now, there's been a lot of discussion recently about Ethiopian treasures seized at the Battle of Magdala in 1868 and since housed in British museums. The Victoria and Albert Museum has offered to return the treasures on a long-term loan to Ethiopia. And as we recently reported in a story at theartnewspaper.com, the Ethiopian government has since called upon the British Museum and others to follow the V&A's lead. Martin Bailey, who wrote that story, went to the Ethiopian embassy to talk to the ambassador, Haile Michael Abera Afewerk, about this subject.
Your Excellency, Mr. Afewerk, we're very grateful that you've offered to discuss the future of objects which were looted by British troops at the Battle of Magdala in 1868 and brought back to the UK. The three main collections here in Britain are now at the Victoria and Albert Museum, the British Museum and the British Library. Now, let's start by talking about the V&A. They've just recently opened a display with around 20 objects which were looted in Magdala, and it's the first time they've been brought together, I think, in living memory. Now, I wanted to ask, what were your emotions when you came and saw the display for the first time and you suddenly saw a group of objects which had been seized from the imperial treasury and from Christian churches after the suicide of the emperor? How did you feel?
Well, thank you for having me. As an Ethiopian, I should tell you that the whole country, all Ethiopians attach very great importance to their cultural heritage, religious objects, artifacts, and I mean the whole country. Ethiopia is a museum of its cultural heritage in all corners of the country, and therefore that when you see something that was hidden away, locked in a room, being displayed, that in itself is, I think, something we need to appreciate and thank the V&A for doing this, because they were, as I said, locked in a room for a long time.
Could I ask what sort of contacts you had with the V&A's director, Tristram Hunt, and were you consulted about the display, and what advice did you give?
The display itself was not an objective on our side. Our objective is to keep the demand for the return of the cultural artifacts and religious objects at the V&A and other museums. But they did consult with us about the display of the objects, the artifacts. As I said, was a good thing, given the fact that they were hidden away in a room for many years.
Fine. Well, we'll come on to the important question of the return in a moment. But you are saying then that you welcomed the V&A's display, although it was not your primary goal. Is that essentially correct?
The fact that they were hidden away is not a good thing, because I mean people can't really see where they are. But now that they are displayed, the Ethiopians in diaspora and the British public at large would be able to see that there is such a thing, as you said, brought from Magdala during the Magdala expedition, and therefore that people would be aware that they are here, and therefore that they should be returned to their rightful owners.
Fine. So it's a step forward in that it's acknowledging more publicly the existence of these objects, and we therefore have to think about what will happen next. Now, the V&A director, Tristram Hunt, has offered to return the objects, but on long-term loan, not to restitute them in terms of ownership. That is actually a step forward, I believe, because I don't think that offer has been made before. How do you regard that offer, and is it something that your government is interested in pursuing or not?
Allow me to quote here what the former Ethiopian patriarch said about things like loan and things. He said, give it a name, whatever name you want to give it. The important thing is that the artifacts and religious objects are back in Ethiopia, returned to Ethiopia. And that's the main objective, and the goal is this. And therefore that it's this we need to look at, we need to consider, and to keep alive, demanding the return of these artifacts. As I said, they mean quite a lot to Ethiopians. It's their history, it's their culture, and I think the important thing is that they are returned.
Sure. Let's go into the question of how they would be returned, and it is two separate ways of doing it. One is a long-term loan, the other is permanent restitution. I'm not quite clear what your position is on a long-term loan. Is it something that your government would like to ask for as an interim step, or are you not interested in the loan?
The answer is a quick no. My government is not interested in loans. My government is interested in having those objects back home returned, because that's the right thing to do.
And has that message been passed on by you to the V&A and its director, Tristram Hunt?
In my speech, I said the eventual return of the artifacts and other objects, in other museums as well. I underlined the return of the objects.
Fine. So it is clear that you are then seeking the permanent return of the objects.
That's
now, what will happen next? Because the loan offer is on the table, and you're quite entitled to say that's not what you want. But is there not then a stalemate?
I've always believed that times change.
Yes.
And so do attitudes.
Yes.
Down the road, as you can see, also there's quite a lot of interest in the return of such objects and religious objects and artifacts back to Ethiopia. Many people in Britain, the public at large, media,
yes,
higher education, people interested in culture, they're all sympathetic towards Ethiopia's demand for the return of these objects. And therefore that, as I said, attitudes do change, and I hope that people will understand, government will understand, the institutions here will understand, and accept this demand by Ethiopia for the objects to be returned.
If they went back to Ethiopia, what would be the most suitable or appropriate place or museum to display them?
I know of quite a number of museums, modern museums built. The National Museum in Addis Ababa, in Aksum, the seat of ancient civilization in Ethiopia, the introduction of Christianity to Ethiopia in 330, in Gondar, in Lalibela, Harar, and there's quite a number of museums, modern museums. Universities have been giving courses, programs in cultural heritage management, and the Ethiopian churches have been custodians of such religious objects for centuries. I mean, since the introduction of Christianity to Ethiopia in the 330 AD, that's about 300 years after the birth of Christ. And therefore that the will is there, the capacity is there, the capability is also there, and therefore that this should not be an argument at all for not responding positively to the demand by the people of Ethiopia, because they can take care of it.
Have you been in touch with the Foreign Office here in London about this claim? Because it's obviously wider than the V&A and it extends to the British Museum and the British Library. So what contacts have you had with the Foreign Office about this demand or request?
I hope that the two governments will, as I said, down the road, begin to talk about these things, not only government to government, but institution to institution, and people in Britain who really support the idea of returning the objects, the Magdala objects and other objects, really. So there is quite a lot of understanding among the British public, and therefore that government to government talks, negotiations, will, I hope, continue in the future as well.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. That's very much appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.